let me get my screen up. So I think we're both operating on the fact that A.J. Allmendinger and Martin Truex Jr. are pretty good plays, right?
That's why I get paid the big bucks.
You
You
know?
know, I'm able to do like that in-depth analysis and come up with little nuggets like this. Now, again, we can't really make too big of a deal of it. Other people might find out about these things, so
Mhm.
we'll try to keep it a little quiet. But yeah, I mean, but again, it's a DFS sport. It's an ownership sport and all this stuff. So um, yeah, I think we can operate under that presumption right now. Now, just I'll let you take this away, but just a couple of announcements real quick. The sheets and stuff like that are basically 60% done. I still have like a couple more things to do, and fortunately, we have like 100 hours before the race starts, so I'll be able to get that done. So everything that I say, as far as like construction and stuff, is going to be probably like 50% of what I'm up to. Um, and I do have a couple of questions along the way, but I'll let you just start by just doing your thing.
No, feel free to drop your questions because I'm very much operating the slate with those two guys being optimal. I think. I mean, Truex is one of the best cars as of late in these at these tracks. Like, why would we not play somebody who's like by default a top 10 car with a race that has 200 laps, um, at pretty much a discounted rate compared to what we have seen Truex at. And then same thing with AJ Allmendinger. Like, he has been pretty much a guaranteed 22nd, 21st best car in the races that he's been in. And he's usually finished a lot better than that in these races, and he's starting 35th. Like, I think it's going to be very difficult to get off at Truex. The Allmendinger one, I mean, we can argue at least in like if you want to get different, I think the AJ situation is probably the one I'd much rather try and get different with, either double punting or getting to any of the people in the back from Haley, LaJoy, Hemrick, Nemechek, and Burton. Like, AJ projects the best in like any projection sort that you would look at, whether it's like 99th percentile or mean projections. But um, I think Nemechek, I think Harrison Burton are pretty much identical plays. And if you need the salary, or if you feel like getting different of leaving, 100 on the table, or the 400 going from AJ to Burton, like that would be uh, a way to get different that isn't like incredibly stupid. I just think AJ is going to work in a majority of the races that play out today. Past that, I'm still running my stuff. So let me go ahead and see what my stuff is liking past Truex.
Well, let's look at it this way. So if Truex and Allmendinger are going to be the place differential plays, who's who's like winning the race? I mean, who's going to dominate the race? Who's getting those other points?
So, I mean, I think the obvious play to that would be Hamlin. I think Reddick and Bell are very much in play. I think straight up, Hamlin is probably the favorite to win, based on the pit stall, based on where he's been in these races. He has been the most consistent car. When we look at Reddick and Bell, they both come from a pretty substantial like salary play. Like, if you wanted to play Truex and AJ, you're working with. Let me get my stuff. Actually, I can just do it here. Give me a moment. If we're working with Truex and say AJ, we got 86 on average for remaining guys. If we go to Hamlin, which is the as I said, the guy who is probably projected better from Reddick and Bell, we're left with 7,900 on average. And so, like, technically, we could grab Hamlin and one of Reddick and Bell, and probably Bell, just due to the fact that he has slowly been, um, you know, the where he's ranked here is pretty inconsistent, but where he's been finishing as of late, and certainly in these races, like he's been finishing better at Poconos, been finishing better at Kansas and Darlington, despite the fact that he didn't have the best car there. Him at 98 and Reddick at 96 make it to where you can grab a potential like two lap leaders like right off the bat who have great pit stalls, and like you're covering a lot of bases for your laps led, especially when we look at Larson being 10-7, being a bit expensive. I'm probably not going to play Bubba Wallace because I don't think I'm going to land in the $8,300 range. Realistically, Bubba's going to run all day from 5th to 8th. Like he's going to need to get the lead on pit lane or do something different in terms of strategy to get into the lead. But going to your question of who's leading, who's winning, I think it's Hamlin, Reddick, and Bell as your main guys today.
Okay, let me ask this question, and it's in part, is this a thing? In part, is this something that other people play according to? Is it all right? So I've heard that. Which one is it? That Ford has won like 10 in a row here, or something like that, or 12 in a row. There's some stupid stat. I don't say stupid, but some weird stat about the Ford's doing really well at this track. And as I mentioned to you the first time that I ever spoke to you about NASCAR, it's one of the weirdest DFS sports like that, is that people, and probably smartly, I'm not sure, they really put a lot of emphasis on like course history, track history, how people do at certain tracks, how certain types of cars do at certain tracks. Is that like a thing? Is it a sample size limited thing? Does it even exist? Is it already factored into projections? What if anything is to that?
Well, I mean, going back, a non-Ford car hasn't won here since 2017.
Okay.
But when you look at my response to that would be, if you look at the people who won in those races, it was Stewart Haas cars because it was Clint Boyer, and then Harvick, Logano, Harvick, Blaney, Harvick, Buescher. I would argue that Harvick was the best car, in the field, like during a majority of those seasons. You can argue or complain about what he did 2 years ago and stuff, but I think a good portion of that was like Harvick was a championship contender in a majority of those races. Logano as well in 2019, and so yeah, sure, like Ford,
Okay.
it's won those past 7. I'm not factoring any of that into it.
Okay.
But
I mean, is it a chicken and the egg thing? Is it because it has the best driver and the best, you know what I mean? That
mhm.
the reason why Ford did so well, or is it because it was Ford that the drivers did well? It's like,
Yeah, and then even for me, that's old stuff.
I figured. I mean, I would just figure I would throw it out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mean that is a thing, and even some of those races, turn into fuel mileage, or like Boyer won on a rain shortened race. But personally, for me, I'm not factoring any of that, and I'm sure people are. But to that degree, like if you like Ford, well, you probably like Chris Buescher and Keselowski today, regardless. Keselowski at 9,000, Buescher at 86. Like, are you playing them because Ford has won recently or the last 7 races, or because like Brad and Buescher seem like really good plays? Like I'm going to be playing Keselowski today, not because of the Ford thing. I just think Keselowski's a great play at $9,000, and same thing with Buescher, starting 16th.
What type of race do we expect at this size track? Is it more of a wreck type of track, or is it more type of is it a cleaner type of track? I mean, what's usually the case at Michigan?
We are not looking at a track that produces a lot of crashes. We've seen this race turn into fuel mileage quite a lot. Like when we look at the past, we'll just look at the past 3 races in terms of amount of yellows. At least I'm not remembering a lot of crashes, but I could be wrong. Average green flag run, around 15 laps. Last year, 21% of the race was ran under yellow. Year before that, 18. Year before that was 14. So, in terms of normal, percentage of yellows and stuff in the Cup Series, this is on the lower side of that. So I'm not expecting a lot of chaos. If there is chaos, it's usually, one wreck, like at a 2 on a restart, that takes out, 4 to 5 guys. But I would not build around this being a wreck fest and stuff.
So whenever you have two, and this is DFS stuff, but also for this particular slate, when you have two guys like this, like Truex and Allmendinger, who are just going to project so well and garner just such a huge amount of the ownership, specific to kind of like the higher, not higher buy-ins, but the higher entry GPPs. I mean, my and I haven't run Sims yet, but my instinct is that if you play the two of them together, I mean, you're putting yourself under a lot of pressure to be perfect. And even if you are perfect, you rerun the risk of mega duping. Where so what would you of the other four spots again conceptually? I mean, would you rather look to pivot off of one of those two guys? And if that's the case, which one? And you already kind of touched on it a little bit, like you like Almendinger a little bit less, if you had to pick one, than Truex. Or would you rather try to go for lower ownership of those other four plays?
So the issue that I'm running into answering that question, or building wise and stuff, is that when I start looking at where I want to play, and I'm looking at like the potential like player pool that I'm using, I'm pretty much not using anybody from, or I would not envision myself using anybody from 5th to 12th. Probably not Kyle Busch, probably not Joey Logano. And the rest of the field is pretty much like value plays and stuff. And so when I start looking at where I would end up going, I don't know how different you can get when like Alex Bowman projects so well and has a high likelihood of outscoring everybody that starts 5th to 14th. Same thing with Chris Buescher. Same thing with Keselowski. And with like these four guys, I mean, I haven't talked about Larson, but Larson's always in play. Like when we're trying to get different, like I'm probably not going to be getting the super low in plays between, 5th to 14th, because those guys really don't project to do anything. Like if they're working, that's because they're stepping into a win. And I, don't really see that. I'm not playing Todd Gillen or Chase Briscoe. And so I mean, at this point, like anybody in the back of the field is, value play. So like technically their ownership doesn't matter because like nobody's truly playing like two of those guys together. And if you're not like, if you're getting off a Truex, like does that, like you would just probably default to getting the Larson. Like he's the main contender to like push Truex out. And I know Jake brought up, Truex has been bad chalk and stuff, but that's very much like situational. Like chalk is going to fail or not, like, or those drivers are going to like crash or not, like whether they have ownership on them or not, like doesn't dictate how well they do, because that's like an arbitrary number to them. Like they don't see that they're chalk and then they purposely like do worse or whatever. Like Truex is starting 24th, like he projects, well, he's good chalk. Like if you're not playing him, it's due to you like purposely making a fade, because he ranks out as like the best guy on the slate. So like like going back to your question of like, would I get low ownership or who would I pivot off to? Like, I think this would be the guys that I would probably start trying to get different in, like maybe play two of the guys starting 1 to 4th, or playing two of people from 15th to 19th. And at that point, you already have Truex and AJ. Like that's probably the type of build that I would end up using today. I don't see a reason to do anything more aggressive than that.
Well, there you go, Sterling. So Chastain, like he was one of the first guys that I kind of thought about. It's because again, this is just my instincts is like people are going to play the cheapos, they're going to play the expensive guys or whatever. And so if you can get like these good 8Ks, in all DFS sports, honestly, like if you could get like I don't want to say low owned, because he's not going to be low owned, but maybe lower owned plays in like the 8K range in pretty much all DFS sports like this, it's worth giving some extra consideration to. So I figured, and I know he'll Chastain will fight for my money. Like he won't fight for my money like Austin Dillon will fight for my money, but definitely Chastain will fight for my money. What do you think of him as a play in that range in general? I mean, you mentioned Bowman is going to look really good at 7,800. So what around that range you think looks decent?
So my issue with Chastain is I think he finishes 11th today. Even if he for me, if he finishes like 7th, I'm giving him some fast laps as well as per usual, like you have to with Chastain and potential for getting laps led and stuff. But my main thing for Chastain is like, and I know, Elliott's slightly more expensive. I know Blaney is 10-3 and stuff, and even Byron, but I don't see Bubba Wallace, Elliott, Chastain, Blaney, or Byron like I don't see them like instantly going to like dominate this race and lead the race and stuff like that. Like I just don't see that. And so like the only guy here for me that would like be in play would be Chastain, but then I look at of where I haven't projected where he typically runs at races that I would look at, and he typically is like the 8th, 7th best car and stuff. So he's starting right where he should be, which for me, I typically don't play guys from like 5th to 10th who pretty much only run in that range in most races. Typically, those are better if they're starting in the teens because then they can at least offer you some slight place differential, and then like finish 7th or 8th. Like just so personally, I'm not playing Chastain due to what I haven't projected for on my own stuff. As we stated, like Bowman looks like a great play as well, and the fact that he's $7,800, like I don't know how you don't play Truex, Bowman, Keselowski in this race. Like going back to like where we started of like if you want to get different, I think AJ would be the area you'd want to get different in because we see Bowman, Truex, Keselowski being pretty good plays. Everybody sees that AJ is a good play. Like that's a pretty chalky 4 of your 6 spots. And so that's when I would start pivoting to like Nemechek or Harrison Burton and stuff. I think this race is pretty straightforward based on a projection standpoint. Like you can see who are the good plays, or at least who projects well and who doesn't. For me.
Well, let me ask you this, and I think maybe either Sterling or Sukas would be better to ask, but you probably might know too. So how? And I ask you this every couple of weeks or every couple of races. How have these, well projected guys done? You know what I mean? Like over the last couple of months. How I want to say how good is the industry, but like how well does these like seemingly obvious chalky builds kind of play out, and how, if you might remember somehow, how is it compared to say like last year or the year before? I'm just kind of curious because it's like it reminds me of it's a sport that reminds me the most of sometimes even football sometimes where you make your lineups and everything looks just so obvious, right? And this you put this, you put this, you put this. Obviously, this is going to happen, and then within like 5 seconds, you're like what, who, how, what, So you try to visualize at the end of the race, like who are we going to be tilting over, like then, and you know what I mean? Like how have these kind of like obvious type plays have been doing so far?
So for me, the way I look at that is I break it into 2 situations, and one is, what I personally do is when chalk ends up crashing and stuff, I kind of remove that from, at least on this specific question, I remove that from the data set. Like, okay, they wrecked out. Clearly they did not work. Okay. When these drivers aren't involved in crashes, they do have a high success rate. So I mean, even at this track specifically, when you look back at people who have been chalk plays before, they have. I mean, we've seen Keselowski, we've seen Blaney, we've seen Logano, people who were fighting for the lead, like get involved in wrecks and get taken out and stuff. So like clearly, they don't work in that situation. But if they don't, wreck out, they have statistically been the best plays. And so I don't know if that answers your question at all, but like they're the best plays for a reason.
Let's push back a little bit with this kind of like theoretical question. So I think of golf where they take results and they kind of back the putting out of the results because putting is just so much variance that it doesn't really matter, week to week. As a matter of fact, if somebody does really well and had a bad day putting and lost, you're supposed to actually like give them a little more boost for that, whatever. And when it comes to, again, like good plays wrecking, is it better to say, let's just back the wrecks out of the results for analysis purposes? Or are there guys that are just more prone to wrecking than others such that that's part of the risk of playing these guys? And if you play, say, I'm just throwing a name out there. Let's just say that we'll use our friend Austin Dillon, right? Let's just say that he is chalky but he is prone to wrecking. I don't know if he even is or not. Maybe whatever. As opposed to another guy who's chalky, who is just, just a little more chilled. Like the drivers have that type of profile anyway. And should we forgive a chalky guy who is in a good position to wreck anyway?
So, okay, well now I gotta sidestep. So no, it's not a lot at all. I just see Philip brought up and stuff. So like, because we've talked about this a lot, but I don't know if there's new people watching stuff. Like my answer that I just gave, like throwing out the chalk and stuff. That's deep in the weeds of if we talk about how chalk plays have done this year specifically, it has been very volatile, and they have had a very high failure rate. But as we've talked about it before, has that ownership been even higher due to sims? And I don't want to get in that conversation right now, but due to sims or contest sims, lineup sims, whatever the case may be, we've seen a higher ownership on these guys due to whatever tools people are using, because they have been shown as the best plays entering the slate. Okay, so like that's been established. Then we head back to like what I answered the first time of, if I'm looking at specifically what happens of when these guys succeed, like if they're left to their own demise and they're not involved in wrecks, in those situations they are working out because these guys are the best plays. Now getting back to your question of are guys more prone and whatnot, like yes, absolutely sure, there are guys way more prone to wreck out, cause stupid decisions, or make stupid decisions, or whatever, that increases their volatility. And we typically see that more in the two lower series. In the Cup series, like Truex specifically has been chalk several times when we look back at the last year and a half, and he has been involved in an unusual amount of mechanical failures and wrecks that haven't been his fault in those situations. And so now we're on like the fourth part of this answer to the game theory or GPP approach has probably moved closer towards, or much more towards, not playing the chalk guys, because recently, the last year, we've seen those guys run into issues, run into wrecks, and be over-owned compared to where their ownership should be. So now we're like at the fifth part of this question. For this race, with the lower chance of being involved in wrecks, the likelihood that this race goes green way more than the other intermediate tracks that we've seen this year, and like this track is going to probably be the lowest amount of yellows we see this season on intermediate tracks. This is a situation where I'm okay playing the chalk plays, the guys that project well. But as we can see, we got through 5 layers for one questions, and some of the answers may be contradicting, but that's where I'm at for Michigan in this race.
No, I mean, part of the reason I keep asking these things is because, I mean, as you know, I build, a bunch of lineups using technology and using sims and whatever. And I always think about, what's the best way to set all that stuff up. And these are the things I struggle with respect to, okay, even something like Sterling just said. He says, I think you can trust the projections more because it typically plays out to be a calm race and we see the good drivers excel. Okay, fine. Sterling, smart guy, right? Brandon, smart guy. You guys know your stuff. Doesn't everybody know that? You know what I mean? Like if so many people are aware of this fact and that it's calm and the projections are tight or whatever, I mean, I could argue that it's even more worth getting different. I don't know. And I mean, I don't know if Sterling. I didn't listen to his whole podcast with you. I got through some of it, but I wonder like how some of the original guys that I think he runs 150. Sterling run 150. Is that right, Brandon?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wonder what he does. I mean, does he use sims? Does he just kind of build by hand? I imagine. Oh no, he's the one that built by hand.
Yeah,
like,
he
150 by hand, right? Yeah. And it's a tough way to play. I mean, you know what I mean? It's a tough way to play. So I just wonder if that presumption that it's a very non-volatile from a projection perspective situation, how to build your lineups if that idea is kind of known. I mean, or maybe it isn't. Maybe Sterling, and I use it as an example. Maybe Sterling or someone like Sterling has a much better understanding of these tracks and how projections work on these particular types of tracks than others. In which case, you know what? Sterling, just do your thing. You know what I mean? Like it's non-volatile. People are going to get different. People, idiots like me, are going to just go freaking wild and play 40% Corey LaJoy as a pivot off of freaking AJ Allmendinger or something like that because of the price, and I'll be giving free money away, to the people that realize that this track is much more projection based and you're supposed to just run this. I don't know the answer, but I don't know. I just always think it's worth thinking about.
I don't even know if this is an answer to that, but I think it's a stepping stone. Speaking out loud, one thing that I've been debating this year, and sometimes last year, but more so this year, because there's less content out there, and this might be for other sports as well. And maybe you know this, maybe you do know this answer sheet, but I feel like because a lot of players are using optimizers, using different sites, and they're paying for tools. I feel like a lot of players are seeing projections, because I don't know how other sites make projections, but I feel like people are seeing projections and then like going backwards and finding data points to support those projections. Like, kind of answering the chalk question, or like going back of like some of the other things we've talked about in this video. And maybe this isn't even like a point or like a smart point, but I feel like we're having like, people see projections and then they're like, oh, let me go back, look at track history and see like, oh, well, so-and-so is, projected well at this track or has done X and Y. And like, that's his projection, where I feel like this race here, especially with like no practice, I mean, practically no practice, and qualifying being determined due to the metric, like, I don't know if there's like research from the back end entering or like pushing people towards certain people or not. I don't know. Like, maybe I'm not even making sense. And maybe that's where I'm different from how I build projections, because I just do it like, I don't worry about the numbers at all until I'm done doing my stuff. Whereas like, if somebody isn't manually making their own projections, they see their numbers and then they're like going back to find things that justify it. I don't know.
Well,
I didn't think that was a coherent thought, but that's something I've been thinking about this year.
Yeah. Well, to answer one comment in here, I mean, Jeff Klein is obviously not an Alias fan, and Jennifer Garner was really, really good in Juno also. So to claim that 99% of the time the word Garner is used on planet Earth is in the context of DFS, I mean, now you're some fighting words. I thought Alias was an amazing show. So we gotta reboot that one just to get the Garner thing. And Phil Garner was really good for the Pirates back in 1979 when they won the World Series, I think. So, Jeff, I'm going to dispute this one.
It's so before my time. All over my head. No idea. No.
Well, you say before your time. Don't think I didn't notice that somebody did you dirty with your age prediction.
Oh,
right?
Look, the only good thing about that is like I will look the exact same from age 29 to 62. That is like
that was pretty funny though. They give you a 35 ball in your prediction, right?
They were projecting me by 10 years. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little baby. But yeah, going back to Slate today, like who for you, who's popping up for you that we haven't talked about? Because I feel like we've kind of discussed anybody who would pop up in like traditional like projection stuff.
Well, it's so funny because one of the things that I really love analyzing when I build for every sport, especially when I'm using Sims, is the difference between what I'm getting if I don't use Sims and what I get when I just use optimizers, for example, and kind of screw around like that. And I haven't really run Sims yet. So like I'm really just operating on the optimizers look. And one thing I did was I built with Min Uniques too. And I am getting 100% like TrueX right now. And I'm getting 75% AJ Allmendinger. But interestingly, I'm getting a full like 70% of the Chris Buescher. Now, again, he's not unowned or anything like that. I mean, I still have him at 30% ownership or something like that. But still, I mean, I'm getting a bunch of that. I'm getting a bunch of Kyle Larson. And we talked a little bit about that. You mentioned Bowman, you mentioned Stenhouse. Someone mentioned earlier today Eric Jones season, and I'm definitely getting some of that. When I say some, is this even more than the field? Like, I mean, 30% Eric Jones. I mean, he's got to be pretty close to that in ownership. No, I mean, I haven't projected it like 27, but I guess that sounds about right.
I think it would be. I
Okay.
think that sounds about right.
Yeah, so Busher's a guy I'm like well over right now. But then when I'm just curious if I use my ownerships to to build my field lineups. In other words, like if I run this stuff and I'm saying, okay, I'll presume Truex is getting what 60% ownership. That sounds about right, right? And AJ Allmendinger, like my ownership right now, 36%. That's excruciatingly low. I got to make that higher. But if I make Truex 60 and Allmendinger say 45 or something like that, I'm just curious what the impact of using the Sims is going to have on that. And what's going to be fun is if I get to like Truex and Allmendinger anyway, like to this degree, it's just a testament to what a smash play they are. Like even if they're going to be highly owned, extraordinarily highly owned, if it still jams these things, then, and this is the way I analyze it, then you could probably be pretty sure that they're good plays. If you're trying aggressively to fade them and then you still can't, it's and that even more that even I don't know, emphasizes the point even more about how great of a play they are.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I do, and I wanted to jump in, but I didn't want to I wanted to make sure you got your thoughts out. One thing that I personally like to do is if we understand the issues with field lineups and like completely understand it, like this situation where I would absolutely use this for my own stuff, and I will probably do that to see what happens. If I have a field lineup or field lineups that has like, however X amount of limes and stuff, is not for like what a real contest sim would be. But if I have my lineups and it's like, 80, 90, even like 100% Truex, and something like that, I will run my contest sims with a field lineup that has like 100% Truex, because I have found that has helped me find the better like Truex line pivots. Like if the entire field just has Truex and I'm like using, and this is where like this would not be my full like lineup exposure, but I'll make a sim that just has like Truex and like AJ locked in or whatever, sim that, and use some of the results that it gives me as like my main Truex like builds, because those would already be, counted as like pivots, or like they'll be lower projected lineups probably compared to what the chalk would be, but the sims would show that, hey, this is probably a good lineup to play because it's going to rank them all, because they already have Truex and AJ in them or whatever, and it'll show me like probably the better like pivot lines to play as like my main personal Truex lineups. So that is one way that I do that. And sometimes I do that with like multiple different sims to have like, 3 to 4, 5 lines of like different builds that I want to work with. But that is one thing that I personally do.
Well, again, now we're maybe getting too much into sim stuff, but I'll do it anyway until people tell me to stop. Is couple of things when you do that, and I'm guilty of that too. Not saying it's bad, but I'm guilty of that too. Is now what you're trying to do is use the sims and use the technology to get something that you want. Like you're like, I don't want 100% Truex, so I am going to do what I can to not get 100% Truex. So what I'll do then is assume that the pool is going to play 100% Truex so that I can get my pivots that I want. And philosophically, that is definitely one way to think about using sims. But the other way to think about it is that instead of like using the sims to get what you wanted beforehand, maybe you should use them to get what you need instead of what you want, like the Rolling Stones would say. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that that's wrong, but again, you're then using your priors to kind of like dictate how you use the technology, which is one could argue that that's a little bit mixing and matching your I don't know, mixing and matching your disciplines. The other thing I would say is that what I try to do in certain sports, like League of Legends and like sports where I think the projections are pretty tight, like everybody's kind of like looking at the same things. There's not a huge amount of variance or whatever. Tennis is a sport like that. What I'll do is, again, I'll run like 5,000 lineups or whatever, and I'll use those lineups to represent the field. Okay, that I'm going to then compare myself to. You kind of like simming against yourself. And the issue with that, if you want to do that for, say, NASCAR, let's say Sterling's right, and that this is a very projectable, race. Okay, so you use the projections, you run 5,000 lineups, and whatever you get, you're going to use that as your pool. The weird thing about doing it that way is that if you're going to predict what the field is going to do, you have to also account for dead money somehow. Like there's going to be like a certain percentage of the field or a certain percentage of lineups that are bad. And if you're going to build like 5,000 lineups using good projections and good techniques or whatever, then you're only comparing yourself to 5,000 quote unquote good lineups. So you're kind of like getting a little bit, you're asking a little too much of your lineups to kind of beat all good lineups. Where if you can somehow find a way to include like 30% of them or some percentage of them as just bad lineups, then that's a better representation of the field than just your set of 5,000, what they call good lineups. So again, this is all theory that has not been resolved yet. So I continue to work on this every single day, but I just continue to share my thoughts as they come up.
And see, for me, and I will hold on. See, I will run like because I'm not pulling all my lineups from like one sim result or whatever. I'll use different stuff. But for me, at least on that, because I think I mean maybe I can add something to that. Maybe I'm just an idiot. If I'm using all good lineups in the field, that is acknowledging that if anything deviates outside of that pool, like they are no longer good lineups, correct? Or at least in my justification for it. And so when I'm doing that, I and assume's a bad word to use here. I assume that my pool is the top portion of the GPP, and that the dead money lineups are dead money for a reason, and that I don't need to worry about that, because if those are doing well, then my stuff has fallen apart anyway in some form or fashion. So for me, I personally don't worry about having the bad lineups in the sim pool, because I'm just trying to figure out what I need to change at the top of the line. Like, for example,
let me put you another. Let's analyze this at the absolute extremes. Let's say that you're going to build a field of lineups with 1,000 entries. Okay, and you're going to build a field of 1,000 entries, and you're going to be one of them. Okay, and 999 of the field, or all 1,000 of them that you're projecting, have guys that are not playing. Okay, like you're 1,000 players are in a basketball game. In a basketball GPP, and all 1,000 of them are guys that are out. Okay. So if you compared yourself against a field like that, you know what you'd want? You'd want the 6 chalkiest guys that you can come up with, right? Because that's all you need to do is to beat guys that are out. Okay. So, and then on the other hand, if you knew that 1,000 lineups were being created by the field that were just insanely like sharp and crisp and based on great projections and whatever it was, then you'd have to get a little bit more kooky, to try to beat them. So somewhere in the middle of that, right, is the blend of X percent of good lineups and X percent of bad ones. And the idea is that if you try to get too kooky because you're presuming that like the field is playing like 5,000 sharp lineups, you're probably getting a little bit too greedy, and you could actually play a little bit more conservatively in that sense.
That makes sense. It kind of going back to last week and stuff like that. That is where, like, I know for a fact, like, my personal approach really misses up like the weird stuff that like Austin Dillon last weekend and stuff. We talked about it. That like he was showing up in your Sims results, and I just I would never get to that play based on how I approach stuff like that. That is an absolute fault of mine when I'm like on my personal approaches. Like I know for a fact when stuff like that comes through, like I'm so far dead. Like I'm not getting to any of that stuff when those situations arise. So like today, like if Blaney, kind of same thing with like Chastain, even like, even Suarez, or like if Kyle Busch have a good day, like I'm personally not going to be on them because I don't have, situations or outcomes where they're like showing up in all my stuff.
No, that makes and that makes sense. And I still believe that the best players in all sports, DFS wise, are going to be the people that can do both. That can know how to write and analyze sims, but also can apply their no ball or no car or whatever it is takes to things, and be able to take like a really just highly coded simmer and look at their lineup and say, okay, I get it, but here's an example, but Michael McDowell just isn't winning. You know what I mean? Or something like that, or just something like that. Something that a computer that gives a range of distributions can't calculate. But until then, it's going to be a battle. And I'll give you an example. Like, what's his name? The Uticow. He probably can't even run a sim if I paid him $1 million. I mean, he doesn't. He just does his own projections. He does his whole thing. He just knows more about the sports than everybody else, and he still just wins all the money. So it's very, 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 very doable.
Yeah, or he says it himself. The sims are in his head.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The sims are in my head. Sims are 10,000 hours of what's it? 10,000 hours of reps, right? Or something like that. That's right.
As I do think about it, the one thing I will do today is I will probably not play AJ today.
There you go.
Like if we are trying to approach someplace to get different, at this point we've kind of talked through the field and we've identified the people who are good plays and whatever. Like the guys that have, like if we then, because there's a question about like best plays under 7K and stuff, but when we look at the part of the field that has the most, I guess, variance in terms of outcomes, and this isn't related to Rex, but it is everybody from 30th to 36. Like clearly we see that AJ is like the better play. Like that's, clearly obvious and stuff. But I don't see him being like projection based, he's the highest one. But I don't see Harrison Burton being that much worse than AJ Allmendinger. Like I don't see Nemechek being that much worse than AJ. And so
that's the key word there. It's and that's the DFS question, right? How much worse of a lineup can you play? That's going to be lower owned, and how much lower owned, and that that's the DFS Nobel Prize, right? to figure out how much projection integrity you can give up in the name of ownership, and that's what makes this fun.
Yeah, and then I guess it goes back to what I stated 45 minutes ago when we first started. Like I like TrueX. AJ would be the situation I get different. Now we're just 45 minutes later, and now I'm even more so on that range. And so for me personally, that's probably yet again going back to the way that I would do stuff. I would, for this one specific play, I will personally run different contest sims, assuming that like the chalk comes through, and I want to see what the sims are giving me if AJ isn't the play. And those are probably the lineups that I'll end up playing today, just to see what like the pivots would be off of AJ. Personally, that's how I would approach that or find my answer on that regard.
All right, so let's have some fun. So what all right, who give me a low owned guy that has a shot. How about that? Or somebody that you just have a gut feeling, something that if I forced you to play a guy that's like that you think is going to be like under 15% owned, like give me a couple.
You know who I really like today? I like Josh Berry. I like Josh Berry. I think he's 7,200. He shows up well in my stuff, well enough, and more importantly, he's in a salary range that I can get to, paying up for a lot of the guys that I want.
What position is he?
Berry's starting 16th.
Well, there you go. There you have it. What about the guy I mentioned again? I always play this guy for some reason. So you already mentioned Suarez. You just mentioned him as a person. You didn't mention him as a play. You mentioned him as someone who was driving a car.
A human being on the planet Earth driving a race car.
Who was allegedly driving a car in this race. You did mention him as far as that is concerned. And he's a guy that every once in a while I'll just kind of show up with. And I also will show up with Corey LaJoie every once in a while as well. So tell me about either of those guys, or are those just out of play?
Well, let's take a look at Suarez. It's much easier for me to look at Barry, and I think that's why I just brought him up, because I think Barry and Suarez are the same plays, and I think I can see Barry performing better than Suarez. When I look at my stuff here, Barry has been more consistent than Suarez, and he's usually running a bit better. However, I'm at this point getting different in a slate like this. I will not talk you off anybody here. I'll still go back at my word and say that Dylan stuff is bullshit. Like last week, that's wild out of fucking nowhere. But same thing with LaJoie. Oh man, when I look at the back of the field, I like Nemechek, to be honest. If I haven't ran my stuff, gut feel of the value play that I'd want to get to over AJ, it's probably Nemechek, and then LaJoie is the main guys pulling me down there. I actually really, really like Nemechek today. The more I think about it, I haven't built anything, haven't looked at anything. But I think Nemechek's a really, really interesting play, because he's just ran so bad. He's had so many bad finishes, but he's been running way better than normal in these races. He got at Pocono, he was the 30th best car, and he got wrecked out of a top 10 running position when he got wrecked out. Same thing, or he ran into an issue at Charlotte when he was running better than where he should have been at. I just feel like if Nemechek can actually not be involved in a crash, I think he can unintentionally get a top 15 finish. And then, at least for me, it's much more easier for me to talk myself into somebody like that, because Nemechek's starting 33rd. Okay, he could have a bad day, and the lineup isn't necessarily dead. Whereas Suarez, fumbles down 2 or 3 spots in the running grid, and that lineup might be dead on arrival.
Right. All right. I guess I'm good. I'm gonna get out of here. You can stick around and answer questions if you want, but
what do you? Well, Sterling just brought up Ryan Blaney. Yeah. Is he popping up at all for you?
Who?
Ryan Blaney.
Yeah, I mean, my question would be, I mean, my sarcastic question isn't is Ryan Blaney hashtag Ford or no?
He is. He is part of the Blue Oval Brigade.
I don't know. Why not?
Yeah, that's pretty. That pretty much be my answer there. I'll probably stick around and talk playoff cut lines for drivers. I don't personally, just real fast, I don't think it has any bearing on DFS. And if it does, we can't project for it at all. But I can go through and talk about that in more detail for some folks. And then I got to talk with Goldie as soon as I get done with this. He asked me to look into some things for him. But Sheets, best of luck today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And we'll see what happens when Truex just wrecks out lap 7.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So Jake, let me go ahead and look at the playoff cut line and stuff to talk about this in more detail. I typed in Jake on Google.com and not NASCAR. Let me take a look. Also, our site has been improved drastically in terms of speed.
Thank God.
I'm going to say that because I am so annoyed with the NASCAR website. Every time I use it, it drives me crazy. So, okay, let's look at the cut line here. So when we're looking down here, if anybody, on the fringe line, I mean, all these guys are must wins anyway, but Todd Gilliland, McDowell, Hocevar, Barry, they're not racing for playoff points. They're not racing for points. They have to race their way in. So the playoff line doesn't affect them. I would argue Kyle Busch is in the same spot. Like even Briscoe, like these guys are too far out to worry about stages. So these guys are going for wins. So I don't think that adds a bump to any of these guys on an individual level because they've been trying to win anyway. But it doesn't hurt them in DFS. Whereas like Chastain, Busher, Bubba Wallace, even Ty Gibbs, like these guys have to be conscious of where they're finishing in stages. So they might end up sacrificing, potential finishing position in races in order to stay above the cut line in order to get stage points, which can usually be a slight hindrance for their DFS days because, like on DraftKings, like sure you have, I mean, fast laps and laps that are important stuff, but the finishing position is huge. And if you're in a situation where in real life you're gaining stage points, but you're sacrificing, the finish at the end of the race by 2, 3, 4 positions, like that is really, really huge for DFS and stuff. So like Busher today, like I think Busher's a good play. Based on projection stuff, he's starting 18th. There is a real chance, and thankfully, Michigan should go green. Typically, this is a much more important thing when we're running into races that have a lot of yellows because then people will get off sequence and stuff. If this race goes green, nobody should be short pitting, and Busher should be finishing stages just where he should be in the race, which is probably like 10th to 9th or something like that. And so in this race, I'm not really concerned about Busher staying out to get stage points and hindering his finish and stuff like that. And then at Daytona next weekend, we're not worried about that because it's Daytona, whatever's going to happen. Darlington is a situation where I will probably be very hesitant to play anybody who is on the cut line within like points of being in and out because they are going to prioritize trying to make the playoffs versus winning the race. So I think this is a bigger discussion in 2 weeks and not Michigan because it stays green for so long. That's what I would say, Jake. And I'm sorry you put that up a long time ago, but I'm just getting to it. Okay. Oh man. Ooh, we got dead crew member Juju. That's a real thing. But I don't know, Garrett. The whole field's gonna have Scott Bloomquist on there, man. I don't know if we could have two dead member Juju bumps. I don't know if they cancel each other out and stuff. But man, that is one thing. Shoot, man. Maybe you do just play Blaney on that alone. I no lie. Now I'm not running a lot of lives because I really want to focus on Daytona next week. But I have made so much money playing the guys. Like no lie, that's where the joke comes from. Is like if there's a crew member or a family member who passes away related to a race team, very close to the driver or the team, we have seen whether it's happenstance or whatever, we've seen those guys be fantastic DFS plays. So Garrett, that is 100% in play. If that's going to push anybody to Blaney, I am never ever gonna give any bad words to that type of stuff. Let me see. Yeah, I mean Tyler Reddick. Dude, I mean I remember watching. We talked about this yesterday. Rent a Center, Bloomquist, and the California kid Tyler Reddick running like 28th in dirt late models at like 16, man. I would argue, I mean, if we're looking at that's why I'm saying, like, I think every driver has that because everybody knows who Scott is. But Reddick, Bell, Larson, Blaney, I guess back here it doesn't matter. Like, all these four guys have a direct connection to Scott Bloomquist. Fringe, Ryan Blaney, but like these three amigos here all have like deep connections to him when we're looking at him in the race here. And so like I said, we've never ran into a situation where it's two of those bonuses acting against each other. So I guess we could just act like they cancel out and stuff. People really going back to Dylan starting 10th. I mean, I'm personally not playing Austin Dillon. I can't wait to get that diecast. I really don't want to buy diecast a lot, but I will be buying Austin Dillon's diecast from last week at some point in the future. Yeah, I think past all that, I mentioned this really quickly, but I think you got your 4 guys starting up front. You have everybody from Keselowski to Gibbs in the middle. You have Truex and Bowman as like guys who should be in the top 10 at this race, and then everybody from like 30th on back. And I think this is where the GPP is won today. I really do. This race should go great, and we should see guys who project well. They should be scoring near that stuff and finishing up front. I think this is where the GPP is won today, which either comes through with the chalk AJ, who projects well in any projection stuff. And this is where, for me, mean projections don't really mean a lot. Like, I personally have AJ projected for 30 points today, and then I have, this is how close it is. It really doesn't matter what the number is, but I have Haley at 29, which more expensive, projected lower from AJ. So AJ is the de facto number 1. I have Stenhouse for 22. I have Corey LaJoie, Hemrick, Nemechek, and Burton, and then Cody Ware, pretty much the exact same. Harrison Burton and Cody Ware are 2 points lower than Nemechek, Hemrick, and LaJoie, but these guys are pretty much all projected the exact same spot, and they're all within pretty much 3 points of AJ Allmendinger. So I think at this point, going over everything we talked about and, understanding how to play DFS and everything, blah, 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 I think not playing AJ is the way to go today. Because all these other guys are pretty much the same play at a pretty big discount ownership. And then you can get as shocky as you want up here, and you don't have to worry about anything. That is probably what I will end it to. Yeah, I mean, Bloomquist did run Eldora for Kyle Busch. Yeah, that's why I'm saying it. I don't know if this stuff works if everybody has a connection to the driver. It's like, I say this to my friends a lot. I said this last week when we were talking about Sims, because all my friends, I went to an engineering high school and stuff. I was taking advanced classes, blah blah blah. I didn't go to school because I just didn't want to. That was not going to be me. But nearly all my friends are engineers in some form or fashion, mechanical, civil, petroleum, whatever. And so I just tell them, look, guys, if everybody's an engineer, nobody's an engineer. If everybody has an engineering degree, it doesn't mean anything because everybody has it. So if everybody knows Scott Bloomquist, okay, I don't know if the dead crew member Juju works. If everybody knows him and everybody has it, it's like it doesn't exist. So probably, and then it doesn't matter if I go back up and look at the guys that I think are going to win. I still think it's the main 4 contenders are probably Hamlin, Reddick, Bell, and Larson. So I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I don't even know how you build with Larson here. I guess you're double punting. Interesting. If you're playing both Truex, Hamlin, and Larson, then AJ, I guess you just have to double punt, which probably, as I just think out loud, probably has a pretty high projection, but it's not the highest ceiling. I think you play Hamlin today. Let's really pinpoint who's better, Larson or Hamlin. So just out of 3, well, he didn't run Charlotte because he was in Indy. Coming off the last 2 races, this is pretty huge. Okay, so this is why I like to look at these races here. So clearly this is the end of last year, start of this year, and we could see where Larson is, and we could see now yet again ran into issues. I don't remember what exactly happened at Darlington. He just didn't necessarily have the speed at Pocono. We look at Byron, and we see, even before this, he was much more consistent, but he's all over the place. We see Elliott also all over the place. But not in the upper echelon of the top 10. Like this indicates top 10. So we're seeing that. Who else do we need? We need Bowman. So we see that Hendrick is kind of all over the place, and we see that Larson probably wouldn't have been a top 5 car at Charlotte, okay, if he had ran. Now that could be, because he just wasn't in the car enough and stuff, but based on where Larson has been in situations where he hasn't been wrecked out, like he hasn't been wrecked out at intermediate since Dover of last year, we're seeing that Hendrick has been slightly falling off. Okay, and I would argue that Hamlin, I mean, he's been consistent anyway, but I would argue that Joe Gibbs is getting back to being probably the de facto best team. I mean, Bell's been all over the place, but he's 96. We see Reddick here. So probably, I think looking at this race, like I think the only 10K guy you would probably want would be Hamlin. I really do. I think Hamlin wins this race. Pit stall stuff we're looking at here. I mean, the huge discrepancy between Hamlin and Hendrick recently, like that's huge. What has Blaney been doing? The Blaney run at Pocono is very, very good to see. I think thinking more out loud, we're playing tricks regardless, right? But if we're thinking of a 10K type of lineup, or if you're considering that, I think Hamlin, Blaney, and Trix probably beats Hamlin, Larson, Truex today. As I just kind of sit here and think about stuff, or think about how I would approach things. And if you're not playing Hamlin, I think you are absolutely having to play Reddick or Bell. I think you can get away with. I think you can get away with not playing Larson today. I think this is a situation which is probably the first for me this season. I don't think I've not played Larson this entire season, but thinking of builds, thinking of stuff, I probably would not play Larson today. Let's see what else we had here. And I mean, I think that's about it. I think we've about covered everything. I don't see any more questions or anything. Kyle did ask if I have interest in McDowell, Zane Smith, or Cindric. My stuff does not show anything regarding those guys, so I will probably not have any exposure to them. Although I'm not playing a lot of lines today, mainly just focusing on Daytona next week. Let's see what else. What else? Did I miss anything? Any questions? I think I do believe that is about it. Oh yeah, I mean, somebody brought up weather. Can't control that and whatever. Stuff's gonna happen. I typically don't really try and build specifically for rain delays or early into races and stuff like that. I just have not found that to be worth my time, so I just never focus on that. Past that, I think I covered everything, so I will talk to you guys later. I'll probably I don't know if I'll do a live show in the middle of the week for Daytona, but I will certainly do probably a longer video on Daytona. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for hanging out and watching.